Relax. Vanessa laughed as she lifted her glass, her voice carrying across the long, polished table. She's just the cleaner. She wouldn't understand any of this. The room filled with polite chuckles, the kind people give when they want to stay on the right side of the person speaking. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Someone near the end of the table nodded, as if the comment were perfectly reasonable. I stood beside the table with a folded linen cloth in my hands, the faint scent of lemon polish still clinging to my fingers. For a moment, no one looked directly at me. They simply looked past me, through me, the way people do when they've already decided who you are. I gave a small smile, the kind that keeps a room comfortable, and continued wiping the edge of the table as if nothing unusual had been said. Outside the tall windows, Chicago's evening lights reflected off the glass towers across the street, turning the city into a field of quiet gold. Inside, my family celebrated a business milestone they were very proud of. My son Michael sat near the center of the table in a tailored Navy suit, explaining expansion plans to a group of investors who seemed impressed by everything he said. Beside him, Vanessa leaned back in her chair with the easy confidence of someone who believed she understood exactly how the world worked. "The building is perfect for our growth," Michael was saying. "3 more floors and we can double our operations in 2 years." One of the investors asked a practical question about the property owner. Vanessa answered before Michael could even open his mouth. "Oh, the owner," she said with a dismissive little wave. "Trust me, whoever owns this place will be thrilled to keep us here. Tenants like us are hard to find." Another round of approving laughter followed. I walked slowly along the side of the room, collecting empty glasses and setting them carefully onto a silver tray. The carpet softened every step I took, and the low hum of confident conversation filled the air like background music. No one noticed that I paused for just a second when Vanessa used the word owner. 6 years ago, my husband Thomas had stood with me on the sidewalk across the street from this very building. It was late October then, the wind off Lake Michigan, sharp enough to make you pull your coat tighter. He had studied the brick facade, the rows of windows, the small brass directory beside the entrance. "Buildings like this," he told me quietly, "don't just hold offices. They hold stories. The trick is letting people show you which story they want to be part of." Thomas believed patience revealed more truth than confrontation ever could. After he passed away the following spring, I remembered those words more often than I expected, especially when certain people spoke a little too quickly about things they thought they understood. Across the table, Michael raised his glass for a toast. Vanessa leaned closer to him, smiling as if the future had already been neatly arranged. I finished clearing the tray and stepped toward the door, unnoticed once again. As I reached the hallway, I glanced back at the celebration unfolding under the soft glow of the chandelier. My family believed they were building something important inside this building. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was that every light shining through those windows belonged to me. I took the service elevator down to the lobby with the tray balanced carefully in my hands. The metal doors closed with a quiet hum, shutting out the sound of laughter and confident voices from the celebration upstairs. In the mirror of the elevator wall, I could see my reflection clearly under the soft fluorescent lights. A gray cardigan, simple slacks, comfortable shoes that had seen many long days. The uniform of someone people rarely notice. When the doors opened, the lobby was calm and nearly empty. The marble floor reflected the warm glow of the reception lights, and the faint scent of fresh coffee drifted from the small cafe across the hall. I set the tray down behind the service counter and slowly wiped my hands with a folded cloth. This building had a rhythm at night. The offices quieted down after 6 o'clock, the cleaning crews moved through the floors like quiet shadows, and the city outside continued its steady pulse. Most people never paid attention to those small patterns. They only saw the polished surfaces, the bright conference rooms, the view of Chicago stretching out from the higher floors. 6 years ago, when the building first came under my care, I learned every hallway and every stairwell the way someone learns. A familiar neighborhood. I knew which elevator hesitated for half a second on the 12th floor. I knew which conference room window caught the morning sunlight first. I knew the security guard on the night shift preferred his coffee with 2 sugars and always arrived 15 minutes early. Details like that matter when you truly belong to a place. At least that is what Thomas always believed. He had spent most of his life studying buildings the way other people studied stock charts or weather patterns. Not because he loved concrete and glass, but because he understood that buildings reveal the character of the people inside them. When he and I walked through this lobby for the first time after the purchase was finalized, he ran his hand lightly across the marble desk and smiled in that quiet way of his. He said that ownership was not about standing in the spotlight. Ownership was about understanding the entire system without needing applause. After he passed away, the lawyer handed me a folder thick with documents and gently explained that the company now carried my name alone. Eleanor Hayes Holdings. The words looked strange printed in formal black letters at first, but over time they became familiar, like a signature you grow comfortable writing. I did not announce anything to the family. There never seemed to be a reason. Michael was busy building his company, and Vanessa always seemed confident that she already understood exactly how everything in the world worked. Sometimes silence teaches more than explanations ever could. I walked toward the tall front windows and looked out at the evening traffic flowing steadily along Michigan Avenue. Headlights moved in long, quiet lines, and the cool wind from the lake stirred the flags outside the entrance. Above me, the celebration continued somewhere on the upper floors. My son believed tonight was another step toward the future he imagined. Vanessa believed she knew who held the power in every room she entered. And for a long time, I had allowed both of them to believe exactly that. The next morning, the building woke up slowly the way it always did, beginning with the low hum of delivery trucks outside and the quiet footsteps of the early cleaning crew moving through the lobby. I arrived just before sunrise, the sky above Chicago still pale and cool as the first light reflected off the glass towers across the street. The security guard on the night shift lifted his hand in a friendly wave as I passed the front desk. He had seen me nearly every morning for years and greeted me the same way each time, with simple kindness and no questions. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. The elevator carried me up to the 20th floor where Michael's company occupied most of the space. The hallways were still empty and the lights had not fully brightened yet. I unlocked the small supply closet near the conference rooms and began my usual routine, wiping the long tables, straightening the chairs, and collecting the empty cups that employees often left behind after late meetings. The room where the celebration had taken place the night before still smelled faintly of wine and polished wood. A few paper napkins were scattered near the end of the table, and a half-empty water glass stood alone near the center. I moved slowly, not because the work was difficult, but because quiet mornings like this gave me time to observe the place before it filled with energy again. From the large windows, I could see Lake Michigan stretching toward the horizon like a sheet of steel under the early sun. Thomas used to say that Chicago mornings had a special clarity, as if the city paused for just a moment before the noise began again. Around 7 o'clock, the first employees started arriving, their footsteps echoing lightly in the hallway as they unlocked their offices and turned on their computers. Some of them nodded politely when they passed me, offering the casual greetings people give when they recognize a familiar face, but do not know the story behind it. That was perfectly fine with me. Familiarity without curiosity can be very comfortable. A little later, Michael arrived with his usual quick stride, a coffee cup in one hand and his phone in the other. Vanessa followed close behind him, wearing a tailored coat and speaking confidently about a meeting scheduled later that morning. They walked past the conference room where I was finishing the table without slowing down. Vanessa glanced at me briefly and then continued talking, as if I were simply another piece of furniture in the room. If the owner approves the expansion request, she was saying, we can take the entire 22nd floor by next quarter. Michael nodded thoughtfully. The building owner will want to renegotiate the lease, he replied. But we are bringing in strong revenue. They will not want to lose us. I wiped the last corner of the table and placed the cleaning cloth back into the cart beside me. It was interesting listening to people speak with such confidence about someone they had never taken the time to meet. Vanessa gave a small laugh. Trust me, she said, adjusting the sleeve of her coat. Whoever owns this place will say yes. For a moment, I stood quietly beside the window while they walked down the hall toward Michael's office, already planning how to reshape the future of a building they believed belonged to someone far away. Later that afternoon, the building had fully awakened, and the quiet calm of the early morning was replaced by the steady rhythm of business. Phones rang in distant offices, printers hummed softly behind glass walls, and the elevators opened and closed with quiet precision as employees moved between floors. I pushed the cleaning cart slowly down the hallway outside Michael's office, the wheels rolling gently over the carpet as sunlight streamed through the tall windows along the corridor. From inside the conference room, I could hear familiar voices again. Michael and Vanessa were meeting with two investors who had attended the celebration the night before. Their conversation carried through the slightly open door with the casual confidence of people discussing plans they believed were already certain to succeed. If we secure the 22nd floor, Michael explained, we can expand the operations team by at least 30 people within 12 months. One of the investors sounded impressed. That kind of growth would change the scale of your company completely, he said. Vanessa responded quickly, her voice bright with enthusiasm. Exactly. That is why we are already preparing the request for the building owner. We want the additional floor before the end of the year. I paused near the water station just outside the room and quietly replaced a stack of empty paper cups. It was interesting hearing my future discussed as if it were a simple administrative detail. The investor asked the question that always seemed to appear eventually. Do you have a good relationship with the property owner? Vanessa laughed softly, the same confident laugh she used whenever she believed the outcome was obvious. We have never even met them, she said. But honestly, people who own buildings like this care about one thing: reliable tenants. And we are exactly that. Michael nodded in agreement. We pay on time, we keep the space in excellent condition, and we are growing quickly. The owner would be foolish to refuse our expansion. I finished arranging the cups and moved quietly toward the end of the hallway where the windows overlooked Michigan Avenue. The afternoon sun reflected brightly off the passing cars below, and a cool breeze from the lake pressed gently against the glass. Behind me, the conversation continued, full of projections and confident numbers. Vanessa lowered her voice slightly, but I could still hear her clearly. By next year, this building will practically revolve around our company, she said. Whoever owns it will realize that quickly. Her certainty made me smile, not with amusement, but with a quiet sense of recognition. I had heard that same tone before many times over the years. Thomas used to say that confidence often reveals more about a person than success ever does. He believed that the most important moments in business were rarely the loud announcements or public celebrations. The important moments were the quiet ones when people revealed what they truly believed about the world around them. I stood by the window for a few seconds longer, watching the afternoon traffic flow steadily through the city's streets below. Inside the conference room, the investors continued asking questions about the expansion plans, and Michael answered each one with growing excitement. They spoke about the future of the company, about the possibilities waiting on the higher floors of the building, and about the owner they were certain would agree to every request they planned to make. The following week, the rhythm of the building continued exactly as it always had, calm on the surface and busy underneath. Morning sunlight spilled across the marble floor of the lobby as employees hurried past the reception desk with coffee cups and briefcases, each person focused on their own schedule for the day. I arrived early again, long before most offices filled with voices. The security guard nodded as usual and held the door open while a delivery worker rolled in a cart of packages. Small routines like that rarely changed, and that was part of what made the building feel steady and predictable. I rode the elevator up to the 20th floor and stepped into the quiet hallway that Michael's company occupied. The lights had only just brightened, and the offices still carried the peaceful silence of the early hour. I began straightening the conference room where another meeting had taken place late the night before. Papers had been left on the table, and a few empty coffee cups sat beside a projector screen that still displayed the final slide of a presentation. I turned off the projector and gently stacked the papers into a neat pile before placing them beside the cart. As I worked, my eyes moved slowly across the slide that remained frozen on the screen. It showed a digital rendering of the 22nd floor, redesigned into a larger office space with glass walls and new workstations. At the top of the slide, a bold title read Expansion Phase 1. Beneath it were charts and numbers projecting the company's growth over the next 3 years. I studied the image for a moment before switching off the screen. A few minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Vanessa entered the room with her phone pressed to her ear. She stopped when she noticed me beside the cart, but continued speaking without lowering her voice. "Yes, we are finalizing the proposal today," she said confidently. "Once the owner signs the approval, the expansion will move immediately." She paused while listening to the voice on the other end of the call. Then she laughed lightly. "No, we have never met them. But honestly, we do not need to. Buildings like this are owned by investment groups most of the time. People who care about numbers, not faces." I wiped the last corner of the table and quietly moved toward the door while she continued her conversation. "Trust me," she added, "this request will be a formality." When she ended the call, she placed the phone into her coat pocket and looked around the room briefly before leaving again without another word. I rolled the cart into the hallway and paused near the large window, overlooking the city below. Cars moved steadily through the morning traffic and the lake shimmered faintly in the distance under the rising sun. Behind me, the conference room stood ready for another day of planning and confident conversations about the future. Somewhere upstairs, the office of Eleanor Hayes Holdings remained quiet, its door closed and its name printed neatly beside the handle. No one on this floor had ever thought to notice it. 2 days later, the proposal was finally ready. I knew that not because anyone told me directly, but because the energy on the 20th floor had shifted in the quiet way it always did before an important decision. Employees moved a little faster through the hallways, voices carried a little farther from the conference rooms, and Michael's office door opened and closed more often than usual. By mid-morning, Vanessa stood near the reception desk speaking to one of the assistants with a kind of confident excitement that always followed a finished plan. "Everything is prepared," she said while adjusting the folder in her hands. "The proposal is going upstairs this afternoon." The assistant nodded politely. "To the building owner's office?" Vanessa smiled. "Yes. The legal department will deliver it. After that, it is just paperwork." I was wiping the glass wall beside the reception desk while she spoke, the cleaning cloth moving slowly across the surface as sunlight reflected through the lobby windows. She did not lower her voice when she noticed I was nearby. If anything, her tone grew slightly brighter. "Once this is approved," she continued, "the 22nd floor becomes ours. Imagine that entire space filled with our teams." The assistant seemed impressed. "That would double the company overnight." Vanessa gave a small, satisfied nod. "Exactly. And once we secure that expansion, the rest of the building will practically depend on us." She spoke the last sentence with a calm certainty that made the future sound already decided. Around noon, a courier from the legal office arrived carrying a thick envelope sealed with the company's letterhead. Michael met him outside the conference room and accepted the package with a quick handshake before returning to his desk. From where I stood at the end of the hallway, I could see him open the envelope and review the documents inside. Vanessa leaned beside him while he flipped through the pages, pointing to several sections that required signatures or approvals. Their conversation was quiet, but clear enough to follow. "This is the formal expansion request," Vanessa explained. "Once the building owner signs this, the new lease agreement will begin immediately." Michael looked up from the papers and nodded with satisfaction. "Good. Send it upstairs this afternoon." Vanessa tapped the folder lightly against the desk. "Do not worry. By tomorrow morning we will probably have the approval." I rolled the cart slowly past the office door and continued toward the elevator lobby while their voices faded behind me. The building around us moved through its normal routine. Phones rang, printers hummed, and sunlight stretched across the hallway carpet as the afternoon settled into place. On the upper floor, behind a quiet office door marked with a simple brass plate, the name Eleanor Hayes Holdings waited patiently beside the handle. Inside that office, a desk remained neatly organized, a stack of legal files resting beside a pen that had not yet been used today. The envelope carrying the expansion proposal would reach that desk very soon, delivered exactly as Vanessa had predicted. The difference was that the person who would open it already knew every detail written inside. The envelope reached the upper floor just after 3 in the afternoon. The courier stepped out of the elevator with the same quiet professionalism he carried every day, holding the sealed folder carefully in one hand while checking the office numbers along the hallway. The upper level of the building was calmer than the floors below, with fewer voices and wider spaces between the offices. The carpet softened each step he took until he stopped beside a polished wooden door where a small brass plate reflected the afternoon light. The plate read Eleanor Hayes Holdings. He knocked once and waited. Inside the office, the room was quiet, filled with soft daylight from the tall windows overlooking the lake. A moment later, the door opened, and I stepped aside to let him in. He handed me the envelope with a polite nod before turning back toward the elevator without asking any questions. I closed the door and walked slowly to the desk near the window where the sunlight rested across the polished wood. The envelope lay in my hands for a moment before I placed it down and broke the seal with a letter opener Thomas had once kept on his own desk. Inside were several pages of carefully prepared documents. The first page carried the company logo Michael had designed years ago when his business was still small enough to operate from a single rented office. Beneath it, the title, Read Expansion Request. I read the proposal slowly, line by line, recognizing the confidence behind every sentence. The request outlined the company's plan to occupy the entire 22nd floor within the next quarter, followed by additional renovations that would transform the upper levels of the building into a larger corporate headquarters. Charts predicted growth. Tables listed projected revenue. At the bottom of the final page, a signature line waited patiently for the building owner's approval. I set the papers down beside the window and looked out at the city below. The late afternoon sun stretched across Lake Michigan and turned the water into a sheet of bright silver. Cars moved steadily along Michigan Avenue far beneath the glass towers that defined the skyline. Somewhere on the 20th floor, Michael and Vanessa were probably finishing their meetings, confident that the proposal would return with a quick signature and a polite welcome for their expansion plans. They believed the building owner was a distant figure, someone who made decisions through paperwork and numbers alone. It was a comfortable assumption, the kind people often make when they believe they already understand the system around them. I returned to the desk and picked up the final page again, studying the empty line where the owner's name would appear. For a moment, I remembered something Thomas used to say whenever a business decision seemed too easy. He believed the most revealing moments in life were the ones where people assumed no one was paying attention. I reached for the pen resting beside the folder and held it lightly between my fingers while the quiet office filled with the sound of the city beyond the windows. Downstairs, the building continued its routine without interruption, elevators moving, conversations flowing, plans forming for a future everyone believed was already secured. The pen rested between my fingers for several quiet seconds while the sunlight continued to drift slowly across the desk. The office remained still except for the distant sound of traffic far below the windows. I read the final page one more time, carefully studying the signature line waiting at the bottom of the document. The request itself was confident and detailed, exactly the kind of proposal a growing company would submit when it believed expansion was inevitable. There was nothing unreasonable written on the pages. In fact, the plan was organized well, supported by projections and timelines that showed Michael had worked hard to build something meaningful. I understood that better than anyone. I placed the pen down for a moment and walked toward the tall window overlooking the lake. Chicago stretched out beneath the afternoon sky, its streets moving in steady patterns that rarely changed. The city had taught me many things over the years, but one lesson always stood above the others. Buildings outlast assumptions. They watch people come and go while quietly holding the stories of everyone who passes through their doors. Thomas believed that was the true nature of ownership. Not control, not attention, but patience. After a moment, I returned to the desk and opened the proposal again. Instead of signing the approval line immediately, I turned to the earlier pages and read through them more carefully. The expansion plan described renovations to the 22nd floor that would remove several smaller offices and replace them with a large open workspace. A new executive conference room would be built near the eastern windows. Storage rooms would be converted into additional workstations. The proposal even included sketches showing how the space would be redesigned to support a larger staff. I could picture it easily. For years I had walked through every floor of this building, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night when the offices were empty and the city lights glowed through the glass walls. I knew the quiet corners that rarely appeared on blueprints. I knew which offices received the first sunlight in winter and which windows caught the reflection of the lake at sunset. The 22nd floor was one of the brightest spaces in the building. If Michael's company truly expanded into that floor, the view alone would inspire every person who worked there. I closed the folder slowly and looked again at the signature line waiting at the bottom of the final page. Vanessa had been certain the approval would come quickly. Michael had been confident the building owner would see the value in their request. Both of them believed the decision would be simple. In many ways, they were correct. Some decisions are simple. They only require patience before they are understood. I picked up the pen again and signed my name neatly across the line at the bottom of the page. Eleanor Hayes. The ink dried quickly under the afternoon light.
When I
finished, I placed the signed documents back into the envelope and sealed it carefully. Tomorrow morning the proposal would return to the 20th floor exactly the way it had arrived, carried by the same quiet courier who never asked questions. The difference would be that the envelope would now contain the answer everyone downstairs believed they already knew. The envelope returned the next morning exactly the way it had arrived, carried quietly through the lobby and into the elevator by the same courier who had delivered it the afternoon before. By the time it reached the 20th floor, the offices were already awake with the usual rhythm of phones ringing and keyboards tapping across the open workstations. The courier walked down the hallway until he reached the reception desk where Vanessa stood speaking to one of the assistants. She noticed the envelope immediately, and her expression brightened with the confident anticipation of someone expecting a simple confirmation. "That must be it," she said, reaching for the package with an easy smile. "Perfect timing." The assistant watched with curiosity while Vanessa broke the seal and slid the documents out onto the reception counter. Michael stepped out of his office a moment later, drawn by the small gathering forming in the hallway. "Did it come back already?" he asked. Vanessa nodded while flipping through the pages quickly, searching for the final section. "I told you it would," she replied with a satisfied laugh. "These things are always faster than people expect." She turned to the last page and stopped speaking for a moment while reading the signature at the bottom. Her eyes paused on the line where the approval had been written clearly in dark ink. Michael leaned closer. "So it is approved?" he asked. Vanessa hesitated just long enough for the silence to stretch across the hallway before answering. "Yes," she said slowly. "It is approved." The assistant smiled politely. "That is great news." Vanessa nodded again, but her expression had shifted slightly, the confidence in her voice replaced by something quieter as she looked once more at the final page. Michael noticed the change immediately. "What is wrong?" he asked. Instead of answering right away, she turned the paper toward him and pointed to the name written neatly at the bottom of the document. He studied it for a moment and then frowned with mild confusion. The signature was clear and unmistakable. Eleanor Hayes. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The hallway noise continued around them while employees moved past carrying folders and coffee cups, unaware of the quiet realization unfolding beside the reception desk. Michael read the name again, as if expecting the letters to rearrange themselves into someone else. Vanessa lowered the paper slowly. "That is the building owner," she said quietly. At that moment, the elevator doors at the end of a hallway opened with a soft chime. I stepped out carrying the same cleaning cart I used every morning and began moving toward the conference room as if nothing unusual had happened. When I reached the reception desk, I paused briefly to adjust the stack of papers beside the printer. Vanessa looked up first, then Michael followed her gaze. For the first time since they had moved into the building, both of them were completely silent. I met their eyes for a moment with the same calm expression I had carried through every hallway of the building for years. Then I turned the cart toward the conference room and continued my work while the signed document remained open on the counter behind me, my name still drying beneath the afternoon light.